Hello Goobers, it's me, your favorite Goober, and I'm going to try to make this attempt a little more coherent. Yeah, without further ado, I'm going to get right into it. This video is meant to be a response to one of my commenters who had a couple of things that I am going to yap about. Got 2 points. Um, Once again, sorry it took me so long to apply. I would have probably typed this out, but I decided to be a little lazier and just talk because typing takes a lot of time. I tend to have a lot of words to say. Yeah, without further ado, I'm going to get right into it. The first point I wanted to address was centered around, I should say, both of these are centered around Project Fear. That is a project name, not a title, for one of my manga projects that I am currently in the midst of making. And this first point basically asks, how do I figure out a commonality for a fear, essentially? And what I mean by that is it will require a couple bits of things here. So, in this story, if you are afraid of something, there's a potential for you to manifest powers around that thing. So, the more common that fear is, the harder it is for you to manifest powers. And that's just because, it's spread so thin between so many different people due to how common that fear is shared that if you were to be afraid of it, odds are you wouldn't manifest powers around it. But if you were really, 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 really afraid of that thing, you probably would manifest powers around it just because you are part of the top 0.0001% who are afraid of it. Take, for example, being afraid of the dark. You'd have to be unbelievably, so extremely, immeasurably afraid of the dark, basically. Because it's just such a common fear, right? Um, but if you have a fear that's way less common, take for example the main character. Her fear, she's afraid of the moon. And and I mean very, very few people are genuinely afraid of the moon. Now, that doesn't mean that every person, just because it's that uncommon, would be able to manifest powers. You still have to be like really afraid, but the difference is you don't have to be as afraid. Like, oh, I'm afraid of the moon versus I am really afraid of the moon. You know, that kind of vibe, right? Yeah, you're afraid, but this person's clearly way more afraid. They're going to manifest powers. So, with that detail in mind, it's really interesting to ask me why, or I should say, where I draw the line when it comes to like the generalization. When is it a unique fear that gets its own examination for how common it is versus when does it get generalized? And an example that I provided here was the idea for like if a character's really afraid of Black Widow spiders, but they're not afraid of any other spider, only Black Widows, would that fall under Black Widow or would that fall under arachnophobia, right? A more generalization of it. And I think it would fall under arachnophobia. That's kind of the line I'm going to draw here. However, I'm not too educated on the grouping of bugs and whatnot, but I am familiar, with like arachnids, insects, and I'd have to imagine there's probably a bunch of different other kinds of bugs, and so that would probably all get generalized into the fear of bugs, which realistically, there's quite a few different types of bugs that quite a few different people are afraid of. It is quite common to be afraid of bugs. But I don't want to generalize Black Widows into arachnophobia, into the fear of bugs in general. I want to kind of draw the line at arachnophobia and let bugs maybe be split into whatever groups they happen to be a part of. I don't want to get too general because it gets to a point where it's like, okay, this is a bit unnecessary. But if it was too specific, it would allow for black widow spiders, jumping spiders, tarantulas, tunnel web spiders. Like, okay, suddenly now we got too many things, but if I just, like I said, draw that line, okay, that's arachnophobia because you're afraid of a spider. It lets me have things that are more uncommon, which is exactly what I'm looking for, right? If you're afraid of tables, you should be afraid of tables. That should be very uncommon, so it should be easy for you to probably manifest a power around that. Versus if you're afraid of Black Widows, you have to be super afraid of that. Now, as an author, I get to kind of dictate whether or not a character is that afraid. If I really want to write a character about Black Widow spiders, I can just create a character who's afraid of Black Widow spiders so much so that they manifest powers. But still, I think these kind of details and figuring out these details are really important for a narrative purpose, not just as like, because obviously, like I said, if I want a character to be afraid of something, I can just make a character that fits all the details. But if I want to be like secretive or allude to things within the story, if I set these rules, it can be used as like a narrative tool for like foreshadowing as a good example. If somebody can understand the rules and where they sit in the world, then they can maybe figure something out before I directly state it on page, right? Before I call attention to it. So it's important to figure out these rules for that reason, I would say. But I don't know. I can feel myself kind of rambling again, so I'm gonna put it back, put it away, and move on to the second point, which was the reason why this took so long. Because frankly, this I mentioned it, but I had a lot of thinking to do about it. But I've landed with an answer that I'm satisfied enough with. Obviously, things are subject to change, and that goes for everything I've ever said up until this very day, right? From day one all the way to here, anything is subject to change. But regardless, to talk about the second point, it kind of asked about the power system, and I was posing the question of like, what does it mean to use my power system? And they had some comments around that. And one thing that I kind of came around to deciding was to kind of just not worry about exposure therapy because of how and the way that these powers were going to manifest. So, a little bit of context again for like what sparked this comment. It was about me kind of questioning the idea of like exposure therapy because this power system deals in fear. And because of that, if you're around your fear all the time, it stands to reason you would most likely no longer be afraid of that thing as much, presumably because you'd be around it so often that you would probably get used to it, at least to a degree. And I had an idea, well, maybe once you manifest powers, it's permanent, but then it was like, can you manifest more than one power? That question yet remains. I'm thinking maybe, but I don't really know. Um, Point is, the issue mainly with that was like, what do the powers represent? What are they? When you manifest powers, what are they? If you're afraid of, for instance, not knowing what's behind a door, which is one of my characters, that's one of, that's not one of, but that is his fear. He's afraid of not knowing what's behind a door. However, his power is kind of a way for him to take control of that fear, and that's the kind of approach I want to take with all of my characters. I want to write it in a way that's clever and basically allows the character to take direct control of their fear. So in his case, as I said, he's afraid of not knowing what's behind a door. But the power that he manifests is the ability to, well, manifest doors and use them as like teleportation devices pretty much. You can open a door to anywhere you want to go, and he knows exactly where he's going. He will never not know what's behind one of his summoned doors. And That's a direct way for him to basically be afraid of something, but his power is literally him taking control of that. And there's that kind of approach, and I want to take that approach with like everything. So this is a newer character, although I have talked about him before, but I wanted to mention him because I still think it fits the bill here. He's afraid of his vehicle losing control and crashing, right? Really afraid of that. And his power manifests as a car, and he can control everything about that car. Everything, every part, everything. He's got these like puppet strings that he can basically puppeteer the car around. And when he tames his monster, it can transform into a robot. Like when he tames his monster, he unlocks the ability to transform his car into a robot. Yes, that's a reference to Transformers. And no, I will have a shameless reference about Transformers in my series because why not? I'm not saying Transformers is the greatest thing ever, but as a kid, it was one of my favorite things. And the idea of like something being hidden in plain sight, robots in disguise, was always very cool to me. Uh, and still is, honestly. One of my favorite things in fiction media are mimics. Love mimics. They're so cool. But yeah, I don't know. I digress. The point is, he can puppeteer his vehicle, he can puppeteer that robot form, and it's literally him, I guess, just literally taking control of his fear because he can control everything about that car in vehicle and robot mode. And so that's just like a good example of how I want to kind of take that power system, and it tackles that worry that I had of like, oh, they're going to be around their fear so much. Like, what if they develop a resilience to their fear? The point is, their power isn't the fear itself, it's them taking control of that fear. And so that means I no longer have to worry about a world because I won't be riding around, oh, like they're wielding their fear. It's them wielding a controlled version of their fear, I guess. I don't know. It's late at night. Please bear with me. This is my best attempt. I'm just going to run with it. But yeah, that's kind of it, I guess. It was just those 2 points, but that last one took me a little longer than I'd like to admit because I'm still not 100% on it. Can you tell? But yeah, I don't know. It's just, yeah. I think I'm gonna, whew, oh boy, yeah. I gotta go to bed. With that being said, good night, good luck, thank you all for being here, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye bye.